Okay, the record is on. My name is Iona Smith, and I am a grad student at NJIT. And today we will be talking about a historical site that existed from 1940 to the late 1990s. This is the South Jersey clothing store. Okay, there's Natalie. At this time, please introduce yourself, your title, and the responsibilities of your title.
All right, I'll start. Brian Quinn. I'm the we'd call as remedial project manager for South Jersey Garden State Cleaners. My responsibility was overseeing the cleanup, all the activities to clean up the groundwater and associated soils at the site. And up until September of 2020, when we turned over responsibilities to New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection.
Anyone want to go next, Natalie or Stephen?
Yes, this is Natalie Loney. I'm the Community Involvement Coordinator for the site. My responsibility is really to help communities navigate the Superfund process.
Right.
And just a quick introduction from my side. My name is Steve McVeigh. I'm in the Public Affairs Office and help primarily facilitate press inquiries on the Superfund program. So with that, I'll put myself on mute, and it'll primarily be Brian and Natalie speaking today.
Okay. Either one, Natalie or Brian. What does the US EPA stand for?
Well, it's the Environmental Protection Agency, as far as the acronym goes by.
Okay. It's for the federal government, right?
Yes, it's the United States Environmental Protection Agency.
Okay, yeah, because we also have the state, New Jersey Environmental Protection as well.
You have the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. So slightly different acronyms, but basically the same overall objectives.
When was the US EPA created? And what is the primary function of the US EPA?
It was started in a presidential, I think it was an executive order in 1970 by President Nixon to address any kind of environmental site cleanups, anything that companies had contaminated areas, to give a federal oversight to address these issues, to clean up the soils and groundwaters, to that would be impacting U.S. citizens.
The Environmental Protection Agency also. Oh, I'm sorry, Brian. Did I say?
Oh, go ahead. Jump right in. Go ahead.
The Environmental Protection Agency basically is tasked with protecting human health and the environment, and that's a very far-reaching responsibility. It includes cleaning up of Superfund sites, but it also addresses issues in terms of air regulation, water regulation, regulating hazardous material. And so it's very wide-ranging, not just cleaning up of Superfund sites.
Okay. When did the US EPA get involved with the South Jersey clothing store water pollution problem?
Well, one thing I just wanted to clarify is the South Jersey Clothing Company.
Mm-hmm.
Just in case for future.
Okay.
But in the early mid 80s, they've noticed there was some contaminated water, that they had some bad smells. people were complaining, so they took samples of the water and found that there was some contaminants and did some investigating to find out where it came from. And in 1988, a letter was sent specifically to the South Jersey Clothing Company, the owners of the company, saying we're looking to do a full investigation of the area, to which they decided not to participate. And EPA then took the lead to investigate the soil and groundwater to figure out what contaminants are there, and whatever as Natalie said before, the extent of the contamination, and then what's the best way to address it. And that occurred in a ROD that was 1991. In September of 1991 was what we call a record of decision, which is the formal document that selects the remedy to address the contamination found at a site for the Superfund program.
Okay, so so they basically made a decision, a recommendation, you're saying, like in September, to how they can clean up this pollution at this site.
Correct. We did when we sent the letter in '88 to the owners that we of our intent to do what's called a remedial investigation and feasibility study. We usually let what we call the potentially responsible parties take the lead if they can financially do so. And then we oversee that. But in this case, they declined. So EPA did the process. And what that does is that depending on what site you're at or what you're looking for, you put wells in the ground, you take soil samples, and you try to determine what's in what's the contamination that's found at the site, and if you can, and try to determine the extent of the contamination, how wide, how long the contaminated plume could be, and then that's in the remedial investigation phase. In the feasibility study stage, you then develop alternatives to address what you found in the remedial investigation. And we look at the alternatives, and we have 7 criteria that we look at, and we choose what EPA feels is the best alternative. And then we have a public meeting to present that to the public. And if there's no major objections, we then proceed with the record of decision that says this federal decision document that says this is what EPA and or the state will be doing to clean up the contamination found at the site, or have the responsible parties, if they can financially do so, to take care of the remedy.
Take care of the remedy. Okay, because I saw there was 2 of them that was done, 5-year summaries. I believe it was 2 of them that was done from the EPA, from my recollection, from my research.
What it is while you're doing the remedies, every 5 years, EPA is required by the Superfund law to revisit the remedy to see if the remedy is still working appropriately, if there's anything needs to be tweaked, if there's any new information that's come out. As we move down the pipe, new contaminants come on the radar that weren't there 30, 40 years ago, to see if that's something that needs to be addressed to the site. And then over the next 5 years, if there's anything identified, that is the objective is to fix those issues by the time the next 5-year review rolls around. So therefore, at least we keep looking at it, and we don't just, blindly let the remedy go on without revisiting it every 5 years.
Okay. What is Superfund, and when was it created?
Jeez, was Superfund created at the same time, Natalie? I always get that confused. Or no, that was later, 1980, right?
Yeah, Superfund came later. I believe it came under the Carter administration. You could probably look it up, Iona, online to get the exact date of when it was created, but the purpose is to address um, abandoned hazardous waste facilities. So let's say a company was in operation, it no longer is in operation, but it contaminated the ground, the soil, the water, and who's going to clean up that mess? And so basically, the Superfund law was a tax that was levied originally against chemical companies that they would pay into this super fund to finance the cleanup of abandoned facilities. The principle behind Superfund is that the polluter pays. So in the case of a company that may have in the past contaminated a particular area, under Superfund law, they would be responsible for paying for the cleanup. But in the case of where there no longer is an existing company or there's no longer a viable, responsible party, the Superfund dollars would go to pay for the cleanup of a contaminated site.
I can just jump in quickly and confirm. Natalie's right. It was under President Jimmy Carter. And it was December 11th, 1980.
Okay, so you're saying it was under President Jimmy Carter, 1980, the Carter administrator. That's what Natalie was saying when the Superfund was created. Was South Jersey clothing store placed on the national priority list? If so, when?
It was placed on the national priorities list October of 1989.
1980?
89.
Okay. Can you explain what the national priority list means?
That's a list that's created of the I don't want to say the worst, but the sites with the greatest need or the biggest extent of contamination that need to be addressed, and they get ranked. And as they get on the list, the higher you are, the more allocation of funds goes to your site. So once you get to site, the goal is to get the site off of the list so that somebody else can come on the list or money can then be reallocated to other sites as needed. It was just a way of taking the sites and rather than just throwing money at everything, let's try to target and use the money in the best way we can, the most efficient.
So, South Jersey apparently was one because, correct me if I'm right or wrong, because one, it was water pollution. It affected nearby establishments, the residents' drinking water, and the residents' drinking water.
Yes, in most cases like this, the towns are, if their drinking wells are impacted, most of the time, part of the remedy is to get them onto town water, so that they are no longer using well water. So that eliminates a point of impact to the residents, and then it allows us to go back and address the contamination in the groundwater. To eventually, the goal is to get the groundwater cleaned up to restoration, which is the levels that EPA feels below that level is safe, and that's what we try to address it to the drinking water standards, so that the people could go back to drinking well water if necessary.
Okay, can you explain what I think it's potable wells is? Because the residents in Minnesota, New Jersey had potable wells. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, potable well is people who don't have public water, the public water supply. they have a private well that they drill into the ground, and the water is directly from their well into their house specifically. They don't share it with anybody else. So when you have those wells in an area where you have contamination from a site, it's most likely going to get into your potable wells, the domestic wells, and then you would be exposed to it with drinking, cooking, bathing. And so that's why the first step is to usually remove that point of risk and put the exposed people onto town water, so that that pathway is removed, and it allows us to address the contamination.
Um, what is the current status of the water pollution problem in Minnetonka, New Jersey?
Well,
I'm sorry, I
EPA
didn't hear that question. Could you say that again?
It's actually two questions, but I just tried to break it up in one. What is the current status of the water pollution problem in Minnetonka, New Jersey? The other part of the question is, does the state of New Jersey now have control over this problem?
current status of the water pollution is it's still there. It has diminished because EPA turned the system on approximately in late 2000, of around October of 2000, I think it was, and ran for 20 years under EPA's. What happened is when we do these sites, we have an agreement with the state of New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, where EPA pays 90% of the cost of the remedy, and the state pays 10%. Usually it takes 10 years, but there were some issues with the groundwater, so it was extended for an extra 10 years. And during that time, the plume had shrunk, and the extent of it diminished. Still impact, but better than it was. And in September of 2020, we transferred the responsibility for the site to the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, and now they are the full responsible people to operate the treatment system.
Okay, so you're saying that the state now has it. I did see that South Jersey, from my research, I saw that South Jersey clothing store did try to address the issue. However, they were unsuccessful.
Yeah. What happens is there was some site contamination that they tried to take from the some drums and things that were like left on the property, but that was not sufficient to address the. It had gotten into the groundwater and had followed the pathway of the groundwater uh, roughly a mile or so from the site down, and spread laterally for a certain can't remember the exact distance, but so it was lateral and deep and long, and that was what needed to be addressed. And they did not have the wherewithal because they declared bankruptcy, and therefore EPA came in under the Superfund law. As Natalie said earlier, it could be an abandoned site, or it could be a site like this where there's a person who doesn't have the financial means to address the contamination, and they settle for a small agreement, and EPA and the state bears the majority of the cost to clean it up.
Okay, so it's basically a still ongoing problem, and the state is handling this. I did see that there was an amendment for the Superfund. The state was saying they needed more money. There was a hearing with the governor. Was it Clean?
Yeah. And what
No.
happened is in 2000, when we started doing the treatment, we built the system and turned it on. It was only supposed to run for 10 years with the agreement we have with the state. And at the end of the 10th year, we turn it over to them. In this case, I guess during the investigation phase, it wasn't found that there was, I guess, contamination had gone deeper than was expected. So it was kind of going past some of the wells that we had installed. So some new wells were installed to address that contamination, and they reset the clock. So in 2010, the treatment, the 90-10 split I mentioned earlier, where EPA pays 90% and the state paid 10, started again from 2010 to 2020, at which time we turned it over to the state. So the reset was there was a ROD amendment to the original ROD from 1981, 84, and this addressed the reset of the contamination levels, and it got into a little bit complicated agreement between us where we paid this, they paid a little bit more for certain parts of the plume, we paid a little more for the other part of the plume, but either way, we reset it. We ran it for another 10 years, and then, as I mentioned, in September of 2020, we turned it over to them, and now they run everything until the goals of the ROD are met. And the ROD is the record of decision.
Okay. Does anyone have any concluding remarks? Because you basically answered all my questions, but before we go, does anyone have any concluding remarks about this?
I don't think I have anything other than, like I said, the state took over, so they've been running it for 2 years and providing us with the data so we can do the 5-year review again in 2024. Will be the next 5-year review that we look at the process, and then we would recommend to the state if there's any issues we identify for them to address in the next 5 years. Other than that, I don't think there was much else to add unless Natalie or Stephen have anything else as far as the program to add on.
Nothing more from me.
No, I don't think I have anything of value to add.
Well, you do, Natalie, just maybe not for this.
Thank you, Brian.
Well, I'm sure this company will be missed because they made military uniforms. They also cleaned them and they also made them. So, I'm sure it will be missed. So that was very helpful, Brian, that you said another review is coming up in the year 2024.
Right. And like I said, every 5 years we will do this until such time as it's met its goals and is probably removed from the priorities list. Then we won't have to do any more 5-year reviews. But hopefully I'll only have to do maybe one more, maybe two. That's about it before I would retire. But
Oh, wow. You're too young to retire. I just want to say thank you for your time. This was
not a problem.
This was very helpful. And if anything else comes up, I will email you. At this time, we're gonna close out, okay?
Okay.
All right. Have a good day, everyone, and thank you for your time.
Not a
No
problem. Good luck.
problem. Thank you.
Thanks,
You're
everyone.
welcome.
Bye.
Bye.